Like his legendary father, Bobby Allison, Davey seemed born to drive a race car.
He's a few feet away from the checkered flag. There it is, Davey Allison wins.
He earned Rookie of the Year honors in 1987 and had won 19 NASCAR races by 1993. His career was tragically cut short when he died of injuries sustained in a helicopter crash, but he is still regarded as one of the top drivers of his era. Buck Baker, the Charlotte native and master of the dirt tracks, was one of racing's early legends. He was the first racer to capture consecutive NASCAR championships when he won in 1956 and 57. And if it had an engine and four wheels, then Anthony Joseph Foyt could drive it. One of just two drivers to win the Indy and Daytona 500s, he is acknowledged to be among the greatest racers of all time. NASCAR's golden boy, fearless Freddie Lorenzen, had charm, good looks, and talent on the track. He recorded 26 career wins, including 8 of 16 races in 1964.
Fearless Freddie from Elmhurst, Illinois. He used to race at Soldiers Field in Chicago, came south.
When Freddie Lorenzen came along, he was a guy that was very meticulous in preparation. He was very smart on the racetrack, and he was fearless at the end of races when it came time to battle for the victory.
Fred Lorenzen really thought the race through, used good strategy, charged when he needed to, laid back when he needed to, but knew when the money lap was and was always there when it came to the end of the race.
Fred was also a very good businessman. So he understood that if he took care of his car, finished races, won races, and won the big races, then he would end up with more money than the other drivers. And when he had the money, he knew what to do with it.
Joe Weatherly was one of the sport's great pranksters off the track and best drivers on it. In 1962 and 63, he became the third driver in NASCAR history to win consecutive championships. Then in 1964, the 41-year-old was fatally injured at Riverside International Raceway.
He was the comic of NASCAR. He would go when all the cars are lined up, and he would go and steal all the keys, you know. And then the next race, he would steal a gas cap. So he always was doing something.
They used to call him the clown of racing, you know, but when Sunday morning, when they sat down behind that steering wheel, it was all business.
That was Joe Weatherly. I mean, he was just out there going fast and having fun. If he hadn't passed on so early in his career, you wonder what the record book would look like. He won the title in 62 and 63. Richard Petty eventually won his first championship after Joe Weatherly died in 1964. So if Weatherly lives, who knows? Would Richard Petty still have 7?
The man they called Gentleman Ned was a fierce competitor, one of just 11 racers to reach 50 career victories and a 2-time NASCAR champion. Jarrett in 1966 became the only driver to retire as a reigning champion.
He was a guy who went out, did his job, did it the right way, in that, you know, he was a highly respected driver. He wasn't a guy that was going to put a wheel in anybody or do anything the wrong way.
There are a lot of guys who are fast but wreck a lot, and he was somebody who realized you had to be there at the end of the race to be in a position to win the race.
My dad had a tremendous amount of patience, and some people, I guess, maybe perceived that as cautious at times, but I looked at it that I understand what he was doing as just being calculating.
He racked up an amazing number of victories for a career that really didn't last very long. He had 50 NASCAR victories when he decided to retire, and he never really regretted the decision to get out of the sport.
I think he retired around 35 years of age. He wondered why so soon, but has had a great career in the broadcast booth.
And it was in the broadcast booth in 1993, while calling the Daytona 500, that a father's dream came true. Ned was behind the microphone, while his son Dale was behind the wheel.
To
have the opportunity to work in the booth and have my son to win his first Daytona 500. It was so special. And it seemed that Dale was responding to everything that I was saying. I said, take it to the inside, Dale.
Bring her to the inside, Dale. Don't let him get down there.
Don't let him get down there, and he'd cut it to the left and right in front of Earnhardt.
As he was saying it on TV, I was doing it on the racetrack.
He's going to make it. Dale Jarrett's going to win the Daytona 500. Oh, can you believe it?
I never won the Daytona 500, and to see my son winning the Daytona 500 was very, very special.
In 1949 at the Charlotte Motor Speedway, Herb Thomas competed in the first strictly stock car race sanctioned by NASCAR and was the sport's leading driver in 1951 and 1953. He was also the first three-time winner of the Southern 500.
Herb Thomas, solid, hardcore race driver, raced the Hudson Hornets back in its day when the Hudson was a car to beat.
He was one of the early pioneers, very steady, always there at the end, always running in the top 5. And it follows that old NASCAR tradition. If you stay in the top 5, you're going to win a bunch of races, and that was pretty much the way Herb raced.
Herb could build the car, Herb could win poles, Herb could win races, he could win championships. Herb could literally do it all, and probably one of the most underrated drivers in NASCAR history.
For 3 years, 52, 53, 54, led the most races, led the most laps, won championships, a guy who could flat get it done in his day.
He was one of NASCAR's first stars and a true character of the sport. In 1955, when Tim Flock captured his second championship, he won 18 races, a record that stood until 1967.
Truly an extremely good race driver, one of NASCAR's early pioneers.
Tim Flock was a good driver. He was smooth and he had good rides.
Tim was a pacer. He took care of his car, didn't make no foolish moves and stuff, but when it come time to go, now he's tough.
Tim Flock won NASCAR championships in 1952 and 1955, and he was one of the great raconteurs. Wonderful, wonderful character.
These are the guys that a lot of people may not really know a lot about, but they really did form the foundation for what NASCAR has become.
Lee Petty was one of the first owner drivers who was able actually to make a living at this sport.
Lee Petty was the patriarch of one of the great racing families and a three-time NASCAR champion. He'll be remembered as the inaugural Daytona 500 winner in 1959. He viewed racing as a way of life, and few were better at living it than him.
He was in the racing business for one reason, and that was the money. He was in the racing business to put food on the table.
All the time that he was making a name for himself, he was known as Mr. Consistency. He might not win the race, but he was going to be second, third, or fourth. He was going to take some money home with him because he knew this was how he made a living.
So I think when he looked at it, that was a way that he felt like that he was just going to be hard-nosed about it.
But he was tough, and anybody that raced against him will tell you to this day that he felt like he should win every race, and if you're in the way, he's going to move you over.
He'd run over you or through you or whatever to get another position.
It was very, very difficult to do what he did, which was to stay in business. But Lee Petty won enough that he was able to do that.
Here he is, moving through turns number 3 and 4. He sees the checkered flag ahead. He receives the checkered flag. Mark Martin wins.
You put Mark Martin in any car, anywhere, anytime, and he will run as fast as the guy that was supposed to be sitting in it.
Talk about racing. This is the racer right here. This is the racer.
Mark is old school.
I don't think I've ever seen him relaxing or
hear about him going on vacation or anything. I mean, it's all racing.
He is known as the racer's racer because he's a threat to win at any track in any car. Mark Martin is one of NASCAR's most consistent drivers. He has 35 wins and has finished second in the standings 4 times.
Mark, as a finesse as a driver, is just incredible. You watch his hands on the steering wheel, he's all about finesse. He hardly moves the wheel. He just knows where to put it and how to get it there, and he always brings the car home.
He's a driver that understands if you get the race car to handle, that's going to really be the key to victory.
Some people look at Mark as being the greatest guy never to win the championship, but the people that really know him and study his career will understand that he was one of the best drivers ever.
I'm not really sure what kind of impact a championship trophy would really have on my life today. And I don't see how anyone could view me with any more respect than they already do.
Most drivers have huge respect for Mark Martin because he has respect for other drivers, and you can't say that about every driver.
Jeff Burton said he's had more of a positive impact in the garage area than probably any other driver. He says Mark Martin is going to leave the sport better off than it was when he arrived.
Here comes Rusty Wallace. The checkered flag is out. Rusty Wallace wins.
Few drivers have been more passionate about racing or more outspoken than Rusty Wallace. Known for dominating the short tracks, he won the 1989 NASCAR title on his way to amassing 55 career victories, including 10 in 1993.
I consider him an aggressive thinker. He's always trying to figure out, how to go faster and analyzing his car. He's a big analyzer.
We'd get a car all done, and he'd come in and say, nah, I don't like that left front fender, and we'd cut the thing up that night and repaint it and take it to the racetrack the next morning, and he always seemed to be able to make it work.
Rusty Wallace wins the Valleydale 500.
When you're a racer and you're that much a part of a race car and that's part of your soul, you're going to be successful.
Rusty Wallace has become Winston Cup champion.
Rusty's lots and lots and lots of personality. Very big personality in Rusty.
That was Rusty Wallace, and I think everybody enjoyed that, and everybody welcomed that to his attitude. I think the fans enjoy that kind of spirit.
He has got a fire burning inside. No matter what he's doing, he wants to be the best at it.
It's official now. There he crosses the line. Rusty Wallace wins.
That's one thing I think that really made Rusty a success. He would not settle for just okay. It has to be perfect.
Bill Elliott is racing into the record books. Bill Elliott is going toward immortality.
Bill Elliott was a lot like Earnhardt without the mainstream. Came from humble beginnings from the hills of North Georgia and became, reluctantly in many ways, became a big star.
Bill Elliott, the man that nobody saw coming 5-6 years ago.
He's sort of a throwback guy that the fans really can latch on to.
You work hard and you try to do things, and sometimes things don't work out, but to stand here today means a whole lot to me.
He has so many fans because he's just down-to-earth kind of guy. He doesn't not allow for all the image. He's just there to race and have a good time.
I think he come in determined to prove to everybody that he could do the job, and he did.
Respected by opponents and worshipped by his fans, Bill Elliott was one of the most popular drivers in NASCAR's history. In 1985, Wild Bill had a career season, winning 11 races, including the Southern 500 at Darlington that earned him the first Winston Million and the nickname $1 Million Bill.
We really had it going in '84, but then in '85, all the pieces just kind of fell together.
Bill Elliott gets the checkered flag. Bill Elliott has won an additional $1 million in 1985.
When I watched Bill Elliott with all that money falling on top of him, it was like, how could you ever make $1 million driving a race car?
The $1 Million Man, how does it feel?
I don't know. I think it'll settle in sometimes next week. I can't believe it.
It was so weird the way all that unfolded. I mean, it was like You couldn't have scripted it any better.
That's one of the most incredible seasons any driver's ever had. That's why they call him Awesome Bill from Dawsonville.
It was kind of the American dream of you can come from humble beginnings and make a great success.
Tony Stewart has a little bit of that last American hero, that raw side that all of us want to enjoy.
Tony Stewart has like 12 personalities, 9 of whom are funny, smart, charming. The other 3 want to punch you in the face.
A mix of talent, desire, and an outright hatred for second place has fueled Tony Stewart to be one of the best and brashest drivers on the circuit today. Born to drive in any venue, Stewart has won championships in IndyCar, Sprint, and stock cars.
The big trophy will go to Tony Stewart. The Rushville Rocket from Indiana is the NASCAR Winston Cup champion.
He comes to the racetrack to race, not to do PR work, not to make you happy. He comes to the racetrack to race.
Tony's hard-headed, hard-nosed, and a great race car driver, period.
It's not about what the prize money is or where it's at. It's just the fact that you get to go out and drive a race car.
Tony Stewart, a native Hoosier, his dream comes true.
Tony Stewart is the fiercest competitor that we have today. I mean, everybody wants to win. He hates to lose.
Tony Stewart is the 2005 NASCAR Nextel Cup Series champion.
Tony has brought with him all of his championships from other series. He's found a way to win more championships here. The only thing Tony wants to do is race. He'll race Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night.
Dirt, asphalt, road courses. He'll race remote control cars. I don't care.
It's just absolute raw talent. It's the ability to drive anything at any time, in any condition.
That to me is a true race car driver. A driver who struggles with the transition to go from one type of motor racing to another is to me just only a good driver, and Tony's definitely a great driver.
In my opinion, right now is no better driver than Tony Stewart.
Curtis Turner was arguably the greatest driver of his generation.
Curtis Turner was one of NASCAR's pioneers. As a master of the dirt track, his driving philosophy was run till it breaks. In 1949 at Langhorne Speedway, he won the 4th race of NASCAR's inaugural season. He finished his career with 17 victories.
I've always thought Curtis, he could do more stuff with a car than anybody that I ever seen.
He could physically handle a race car as good as anyone who has ever driven a race car, especially on dirt.
Primarily because he was the master of the power slide on the dirt tracks.
It's just like he could pick it up and set it somewhere. There's not a human I ever known that was as good as he was as far as controlling it in a slide.
On a pure talent basis, Curtis would make guys who really knew what they were looking at shake their heads.
If you were going to run a 5-lap race or 10-lap race, you'd always bet on Curtis.
Edward Glenn Roberts, a.k.a. Fireball from his days as a baseball pitcher, was widely regarded as the greatest driver never to win a championship. Among his 33 victories, the Daytona 500 in 1962. Roberts died 2 years later from burns sustained in a crash at the World 600 in Charlotte. He was just 35.
Fireball Roberts, in my opinion, was the first superstar in NASCAR.
He was one of the first guys to think of himself as a professional in racing.
A real natural driver. He could feel the track and the wind and the way things were. He had that special, unique sense about him.
He was always the guy to beat, especially when you went to a super speedway.
His main goal was he wanted to win. That's all he knew, Fireball, and he was tough.
Fireball drove hard. He didn't take good care of his equipment because he was more interested in going to the front. And by doing that, he won quite a few races.
Your favorite car is like your favorite sport coat. You just put that bad boy on, and every time you put it on, you look good, and it feels good, and you're ready to go somewhere.
The Daytona 500 belongs to Franklin, Tennessee's Darrell Waltrip. He's done it.
Darrell Waltrip was one of the first drivers that kind of came in and he wasn't afraid to shake up the establishment at that time.
Oh, I won the Daytona 500! I won the Daytona 500!
When Darrell come on the scene, he was like Muhammad Ali. He didn't care what he said, how he said it.
Darrell Waltrip liked to run by opponents on the track and run his mouth off of it. He did both often in the late 1970s and 80s when he was among the sport's elite drivers. He won 3 NASCAR championships, and his 84 victories are tied for 3rd all time.
Most drivers believed in letting their performance and their race car do their talking for them.
Darrell Waltrip has scored the victory here, his 2nd win of the year.
Darrell Waltrip believed that, but I think Darrell almost created a new fan buzz for our sport because he became the very vocal driver.
He immediately developed a reputation of being brash, cocky, and he really understood the value of psychological warfare with a lot of his fellow competitors.
His biggest asset and the biggest part of his legendary status is the fact that he can mentally beat the competition way before the green flag ever dropped.
Darrell Waltrip, he has been invincible here.
He knew that once he got inside of another driver's head, half the battle was won.
There was nothing wrong with that. It's just that, that was his personality and style, and, people have opinions, and people thought of either liked him or hated him.
Darrell had the philosophy, yeah, I want them to cheer for me, but if they're cheering or if they're booing, at least that means they're paying attention to me.
CALE YARBOROUGH, you want to talk about one tough customer. Hello, meet CALE.
I've always said if there was one person I ever wanted on my side in a fight, it would be CALE YARBOROUGH, because I don't think CALE was afraid of anything. And you always knew that if he was in your rearview mirror, you were going to have your hands full.
He was just a highly skilled, highly motivated guy that when he got in that race car, he just looked like he was going to come kick your ass. And if you got in the way, then he was going to knock you out of the way.
If you raced him right, he'd race you right. I mean, if you leaned on him, he'd wreck you.
Most would agree that few drivers were physically tougher than CALE YARBOROUGh or better behind the wheel. A 4-time winner of the Daytona 500, YARBOROUGh is the only driver to win 3 straight NASCAR championships. His 83 victories rank 5th all time.
CALE YARBOROUGH, star of the NASCAR circuit, has won yet another race.
CALE was one of the most determined race car drivers I was ever around.
One of those rare drivers who could take a car that wasn't quite so good and just simply manhandle it. He probably could get more out of a car that was not up to what it should be than almost anybody that I've raced with or raced against.
I tried to make them all work, tried to win with all of them.
And he was in such physical shape that he would overpower him during the race. He'd just wear him out himself.
He would get in there and muscle it around when everybody else would say, oh, I can't drive this thing. This thing is out of control. And he'd get out there and stand on the gas and make everybody look foolish.
He could take a bad car and make it good. He could take a good car and make it great.
You knew one thing, when he strapped himself in that race car, he was determined to win the race.
He wins the Daytona 500 9 years after his initial victory here.
You never questioned, was he giving you 100% every lap he was on that racetrack, whether it was practice, whether it was qualifying, or especially in the race.
Junior Johnson was aggressive, and Junior Johnson was tough. To race and succeed at the level he did at the time he did, you just had to be a balls-out tough guy.
In annals of racing, the name Junior Johnson is synonymous with success. After winning 50 events, he transferred his deep knowledge of race cars to become one of the most successful owners in NASCAR history, capturing 6 championships.
Junior could drive dirt, he could drive pavement, he could drive a short track, he'd drive a long track.
Hard driver, flat foot, he knew only one speed, wide open.
You learn what your car is capable of doing, and you take it to the limit. Any driver that does that, he's going to succeed.
He didn't never want to run second, not even the first lap. He wants to lead every lap from start to finish.
Go or blow. If it lasted, fine. He'd be up front. And if it blow up, that was okay too.
He was a brilliant driver. He is a brilliant car mechanic. There is very little that Junior can't do that Junior doesn't do spectacularly well.
We knew of Jeff Gordon, but we didn't know what to expect of him. And what we first saw of him was, hey, this kid's kind of out of control. He's kind of wild. And all of a sudden, man, when he hit that stride in that 24 car.
Jeff Gordon, winner of the Daytona 500, youngest driver to do it.
Those colors and him, they blended together, and all they meant was championships and wins.
NASCAR Winston Cup Series champion, Jeff Gordon.
Jeff Gordon's looks may not fit a traditional race car driver's profile, but behind the wheel, he's a natural. With 3 victories in the Daytona 500 and 4 in the Brickyard 400, he leads all active racers in wins. Gordon is 3rd in year-end titles with 4.
Boy, what can you say? 4 championships in Winston Cup racing.
Jeff was and is the face of the new NASCAR.
Forever, it was, you know, these good old boys, these Southerners, and then along came Jeff Gordon, who was polished, California good looking, and every time he climbed out of the car, it was someone that Madison Avenue could relate to.
He does a great job with all his sponsors and all that stuff, but what he always was a racer and a smart racer. We spent 90% of our time together talking about the race car.
That passion has never died down. Once I get in that car and I start that engine, you know, I'm a fierce competitor. I don't like to lose.
On the racetrack, he's as fierce as they come, and he's had his run-ins with people. He knocked a few out of the way, too.
Jeff has deliberately, publicly said, I don't care what other drivers think of me. I'm going to do whatever it takes.
Your personality really comes out on the racetrack. And through competition, in the heat of the moment, you know, that's who you are.
And you knew that when they unloaded that race car, you better be ready to pack your lunch because he was getting ready to give you an all-day workout.
And it is Jeff Gordon victorious.
And you give him a chance, you open that door, and more times than not, he'll slam it on you.
Bobby Allison is the kind of person, if he could have, he would have driven the race car, pulled into the pits, unbuckled, jumped out, changed the tires, filled it full of gas, adjusted the wedge in the car, jumped back in, strapped in, and gone on.
I was very, very enthusiastic and very willing to do whatever it took to get that next step taken.
All Bobby wanted to do was win. In a lot of ways, if you have that attitude, you have to approach the sport where you're either with me or you're against me. And I think there's drivers out there that are still like that. Bobby was just one of the first ones to come along that was like that.
If I had to pick 5 of the most fierce competitors in NASCAR history, Bobby Allison would be one.
A fixture in the sport, Bobby Allison competed in NASCAR for a quarter of a century. He won the championship in 1983, and 5 years later, at age 50, captured his 3rd Daytona 500. His 84 wins tie him with Darrell Waltrip for 3rd all-time.
He had success everywhere he went. He won races everywhere he went.
Bobby Allison wins here at Talladega.
This man won for 16 different teams. 16 different teams.
He was as smart a race car driver as there was. When it come to cars, setting up cars, building cars, driver, there wasn't anybody any better than Bobby Allison.
His ability to get to the end, to the last lap, was ungodly.
And it is Allison going to the lead. He's come from nowhere.
He had a very unique way of staying in shape and dealing with the heat.
And the hotter it got and the longer the race went,
He just seemed to thrive on that.
And I remember a race at Darlington. It was blistering hot, and drivers were being pulled out of their cars one after the other after the other.
And Allison right now seems to be so much stronger than anybody else on the racetrack.
So while the younger guys are being carried out of the car, you know, Bobby goes on to win the race.
Here comes the winner, Bobby Allison.
You find out later the way that Bobby handled the heat. He would drive around Alabama in the summer, windows rolled up, heat full blast. And that's how he learned to handle the heat inside a race car.
As far as hard work, Bobby Allison put more time and more energy and more effort into it than any other driver.
David Pearson really would annoy me. Just be back over there and, boy, I got him beat today, and I'd have tire marks on my doors from racing close with Richard Petty and whoever. And here at the end of the race there, that guy'd be standing with a pretty girl in victory lane.
They call him the Silver Fox for a reason. A lot of times the farmer may not know where the Silver Fox is or when the fox goes into the hen house, but he always ends up getting in there.
Every race we went to, I always felt like I had a chance of winning.
David Pearson was talented, smart, and slick on the track. Time and again, the driver they called the Silver Fox won races with late surges. It all added up to 105 victories, the second most all-time, and 3 championships.
Pearson, he was, to me, the best race car driver that I've ever driven against. And I've driven against, you know, all of them. There's a lot of good drivers out there, but there's not that many good racers. And he knew where he was, what his circumstances was, and he took advantage of that.
Pearson backs off for Petty. Petty takes the lead. Something wrong with Pearson?
David Pearson would take care of the equipment, realizing that there would always be a stage of the race where it was then time for him to go.
David Pearson falling back on this very last lap.
You just drop back a little bit and in the draft and get your speed up and run right up to him and draft by him.
To have suddenly slowed up like that makes me think he backed off on purpose because he's now closing right in behind Richard Petty as they turn and come for home.
And then all of a sudden he'd appear and drive right around you like you were parked.
It is going to be Pearson winning it. An incredible, daring move, and it paid off for David Pearson.
And you can teach guys how to do it, when to back off, when to get on, and all that. But to some, it's just a natural, and he was.
The further away you get away from what Richard Petty did, the harder it is to understand it.
You are watching an incredible moment in the history of motorsport. One of the most beloved race drivers in the history of the sport, winning the most difficult stock car race there is for the 7th time.
He won 7 Daytona 500s. He won 7 Winston Cup titles. He won 200 races. Nobody's going to approach that. He is the king.
Richard Petty seemed to wear a perpetual smile, and with good reason. His 200 victories lead all drivers, and his 7 championships are matched only by Dale Earnhardt. In 1967, the King earned his nickname by winning a record 10 straight races and 27 overall.
He was the crown prince when I first came on the scene, was well loved by the fans and by the press and by NASCAR. But that 27-win season really cemented the idea of him being the king.
Richard Petty put together the most amazing streak, one that absolutely not only will never be broken, it will never even be approached.
In the 67, we won everything there was to win. And we had 2 or 3 races in there where we just flat lucked up and won races. And others we just particularly dominated.
Richard came along with a father that was racing and had factory backing, and also he had the best equipment going.
That was his life. I mean, that's all they did was race, 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 race.
Richard used to say, that's why we run so many races. We don't hunt and we don't fish and we don't play golf. We race.
Richard Petty has won the 200th race of his incomparable Grand National stock car racing career.
Mr. President, it's great to have you here. Richard Petty winning his 200th, it's quite a day, isn't it?
Well, it certainly is. I understand that no one in the whole history of racing has ever done that or ever won 200 races.
Really, it didn't hit home. We'd won all those races, and then these people start talking about it, and, you know, then all of a sudden you say, man, that's a heck of a deal.
Dale Earnhardt was every man. You could identify with Dale Earnhardt Sr. the same way that people could identify with John Wayne.
Beware, because when that cat got behind you, you knew that either you had to get away from him or get out of his way. One of the two, because he was coming through.
The Intimidator transcended the sport. No other racer struck such fear in the hearts of his opponents, and few were as successful as Dale Earnhardt. He won 76 races, and his 7 championships tie him with Richard Petty for the most all time.
When you were racing against Dale, you'd wake up at night and have that black 3 in your mind, and you knew you were in for a battle with that car.
Usually he was going to get the best of you. You weren't going to get the best of him. He was a blast to race with, but at the same time he was irritating to race with because, you know, he was just so tough.
He could go places on the track that I would say that angels fear to tread and only great racers can go.
He sort of took it on himself to say, okay, I'm going to go out here and win, and I'm going to knock anybody out of my way I can to have to do it. And if people don't like it, they can lump it.
He wanted that win. Second was nothing to Dale.
Dale Earnhardt is champion.
7 championships. He'd won almost every race that's out there.
And then in 1998, Earnhardt won the big one. At the age of 46, the Intimidator finally captured the coveted Daytona 500.
Dale Earnhardt will come to the caution flag to win the Daytona 500.
Just feeling it, feeling his emotions. Everybody, I think, in the grandstands and on pit road said, you know, they got chills running up and down their spine.
Every man on every crew has come out to the edge of pit lane to congratulate the man who has dominated everything there is to win in this sport.
Everybody was happy and relieved that the man, after 20 years of trying, had finally won the Daytona 500.
3 years later, Earnhardt was killed on the final lap of the 2001 Daytona 500. But his legend lives in the hearts of race fans everywhere.
I don't think that any of us realized what an icon he was until after his death. But it was very gratifying to see his career grow and become such an icon in the sport.
His history and his reputation and who he is probably bigger today than it was when he was still racing.